want you to stop for a second and just, think about something for me. How many things have you already done today purely on blind trust?
Oh, that's a big question right out of the gate.
Right. But I'm serious. Like, really think about it. You woke up, you probably ate something because you were hungry, and you just trusted the food wouldn't make you sick.
Yeah, you didn't run a chemical analysis on your breakfast.
Exactly. And then you drove or walked to work, right? You accelerate through a green light, implicitly trusting that the cross traffic, which is driven by complete strangers, by the way, would actually stop at their red light.
It is wild when you actually stop and think about it.
It really is. Maybe you checked the weather forecast and grabbed an umbrella, or, I don't know, took a prescribed medication with your morning coffee. We do all of this without a second thought.
Yeah.
But, why?
Well, we essentially outsource our survival to these systems every single day. I mean, it's the invisible architecture of our modern existence, really.
Yeah.
We rarely pause to consider how much of our daily life relies on this foundation of unverified, implicit trust. Like, trust in people and mechanisms we have never actually met or inspected.
So what if that mundane, everyday reliance is actually the exact same cognitive machinery as religious faith? Because that is the argument we are unpacking today in this deep dive.
And it's a really fascinating argument.
Yeah, we're looking at a deeply reflective sermon. It's titled Because of Faith, and is delivered by Pastor Yasushi Nemoto at Kahului Union Church. That's over on the island of Maui in Hawaii.
Beautiful place.
Definitely. And the sermon is an exploration of a text from the Bible, specifically the 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 13 through 18. So our mission here is to dissect the anatomy of trust and faith.
Right, but not as abstract theological concepts just floating in the clouds,
Exactly. We want to look at them as highly practical tools for navigating, suffering, aging, and just the fleeting nature of the world around us.
And Pastor Nemoto approaches this text by grounding it entirely in those mundane realities you just described. He draws a direct parallel between our everyday actions, like eating because of hunger or taking an umbrella because of a forecast, and the biblical concept of faith.
Okay, but I need to pump the brakes here and push back on this premise just a little bit.
Sure, go for it.
Because when I take a pill for a headache, or when I stop at a red light, or check the weather app on my phone, those actions are based on science, right? Engineering, measurable data. It is not just faith in the spiritual sense. I am relying on the scientific method.
Well, the scientific method is the foundation of those tools. Yeah, absolutely. But let's look at the behavioral reality of how you as an individual interact with them.
Yeah.
You are relying on science conceptually, but practically, you do not verify the math every morning.
Well, no, I definitely don't have time to do that.
Nobody does. I mean, do you check the supercomputer's atmospheric modeling code before deciding to bring the umbrella?
No. I just look for the little cloud icon.
Right. And do you read the peer-reviewed, double-blind clinical trials before swallowing an aspirin? Do you open the metal box at the intersection to inspect the circuitry of the traffic light?
Okay. Fair point. I don't do any of that.
You act because you trust this system. You're placing your trust in the experts, the accumulated knowledge, and the societal structures that govern those systems.
So you're saying the distinction is between the existence of the data and my personal interaction with it. Like, the data might be objective, but my action of swallowing the pill is still fundamentally a leap of trust.
Yes, exactly. And that leap is exactly how Pastor Nemoto connects our daily lives to the words of the Apostle Paul.
Right, the quote from 2 Corinthians.
Yeah, where Paul writes, "I believed, therefore I spoke." The pastor is establishing that faith, at least in the way Paul lived it, is not some baseless, irrational delusion.
It's more practical than that.
Much more. It is the act of living your life based on a deep foundational trust, utilizing the exact same cognitive machinery we use with the systems around us. We trust the system, and therefore we act. Paul trusted, and therefore he spoke.
Okay, I see where he's going with this.
Yeah.
But I have to say, it is incredibly easy to trust the system when the medicine cures your headache and the red light successfully stops the oncoming truck.
Oh, for sure.
But what happens when the system fails? Like, what happens to that internal architecture of trust when you take the medicine and you just get sicker? Or when your life completely falls apart? Does the whole thing just collapse?
That is the million-dollar question. And to understand how this trust survives failure, we have to look at Paul's context at the time he wrote this second letter to the Corinthians.
Right. The historical background is super important here.
Yeah. According to the source material, it had been over 20 years since Paul's famous, dramatic encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus.
Which, just for context, was a massive psychological pivot for him. I mean, this was a man who formally dedicated his life to actively hunting and persecuting believers.
Yeah, he was literally arresting them.
And then that encounter completely altered his trajectory, turning him into someone dedicating his life to spreading the very message he previously tried to destroy.
Right. And 20 years later, he is not riding an emotional high from that pivot.
Yeah.
He is deeply entrenched in the consequences of it.
It's been a rough couple of decades for him.
Exactly. And when Paul says, I believed, therefore I spoke, he is explicitly quoting an older text. He's quoting Psalm 116.
Okay, the deep cut.
Yeah, and Pastor Nemoto highlights this really crucial detail in that psalm. If you look at verse 10, right next to the phrase, I believed, the author also writes, I am greatly afflicted.
I believed, but also I am greatly afflicted. That is a massive paradox.
It really is.
Because you would think someone claiming profound faith would be talking about how great things are going,
Right.
Like, I believed it, everything worked out perfectly.
Right. Pastor Nemoto admits he was initially perplexed by this combination too. Like, how do those two things exist in the same sentence?
Yeah, it feels contradictory.
But if you look at the verses immediately preceding Paul's quote in 2 Corinthians, Paul describes his own current state using incredibly grim language. He writes about being, quote, pressed on every side, perplexed, persecuted, struck down.
Wow. So it sounds like Pastor Nemoto is arguing that if your worldview hasn't been brutally attacked, like if you haven't been greatly afflicted, you don't actually know if you have faith at all. You might just have a comfortable life.
That is spot on. He is dismantling this common misconception that faith is like a protective shield.
Right, like a magic force field.
Exactly. People often treat belief like a transaction. If you plug in the right theology and hit a certain spiritual level, you get an upgrade where pain and doubt just bounce off of you.
Oh, yeah. And then if you get sick or fail, the assumption is, oh, your shield was down or you didn't believe hard enough.
Which is an incredibly fragile way to live. Because, let's face it, pain is inevitable.
So then what does it psychologically mean to believe while you're actively suffering?
Well, it means true faith is not reaching some Zen state where you are immune to worry. It is a gritty, exhausting process.
It's work.
It is hard work. It means you doubt, you suffer, you get completely knocked down, you are at a loss for answers. And in the middle of all that friction, you choose to trust again.
That's a powerful way to frame it.
It's the capacity to be profoundly afflicted, feeling the full weight of the persecution and the perplexity, and still saying, I believe.
Okay, so Paul is suffering, and internally, he chooses to keep trusting. But if he is pressed on every side and struck down, and someone confronts him, how does he justify that?
What do you mean?
Well, like if he says, my life is a disaster, I'm being hunted, but I'm trusting this unseen reality, that sounds completely insane to an outside observer. How do you defend that mindset to someone who haven't been in your shoes?
Okay. The source approaches this dilemma by bringing in a story from the Gospel of John, chapter 9. It involved the man who was born blind.
Okay, I know this one.
Yeah, so Jesus heals this man, giving him his sight. And this completely infuriates the religious authorities of the time. They interrogate the man, repeatedly demanding that he deny Jesus, and they're basically trying to trap him in a complex theological debate.
Right, and the man just refuses to play their game, doesn't he?
Completely.
He doesn't try to spar with them using advanced theology or attempt to explain the cosmic mechanics of the miracle. He just looks at them and says, I don't know if he is a sinner. I only know one thing. I was blind, and now I see.
It's such a brilliant response, and Pastor Nemoto uses this to make a really crucial distinction between two types of knowledge. He calls them borrowed knowledge and lived experience.
Okay, break that down for me.
So borrowed knowledge includes all the things we learn from reading books, listening to lectures, or adopting the theories of others.
Hold on, I have a major issue with diminishing borrowed knowledge.
I figured you might.
Because borrowed knowledge is the foundation of human progress. If I am diagnosed with a serious disease, I absolutely want the borrowed knowledge of an oncologist over my own lived experience of just feeling sick. Is Nemoto seriously suggesting we ignore experts and objective data when life gets hard?
No, not at all. He explicitly states that acquiring correct knowledge is essential. We need the oncologists, the meteorologists, and the engineers for society to function.
Okay.
But he is drawing a sharp line between functional knowledge, like how we cure disease or build a bridge, and foundational existential resilience.
Wow.
Like how you keep from mentally collapsing when the oncologist tells you the treatment isn't working.
Okay, I get it now. So it is about what holds your identity together internally when the external systems fail.
Yes, exactly. In the realm of deep personal resilience, borrowed knowledge is fragile. Think of borrowed knowledge like scaffolding.
Scaffolding, okay.
It is incredibly useful for constructing a building, but it is bolted on the outside. If a storm comes, or if someone with a clever argument and better rhetoric challenges your intellectual theories, that scaffolding can be dismantled.
Right, your worldview can be shaken.
But lived experience, however, is the rebar poured directly into the concrete of your foundation. You can unscrew scaffolding, but you cannot argue with concrete.
Oh, that's a great analogy. So if you walk up to a man who has been blind his entire life, who is now looking directly at your face, and you tell him that his healing is mathematically, logically, and theologically impossible, he is just going to look at you.
Yeah, because he's seeing you.
Exactly. You cannot debate the sight out of his eyes.
His defense is not an intellectual construct that can be outdebated. It is an undeniable personal reality. And Pastor Nemoto argues that this was Paul's strength as well.
Because of his experience on the Damascus Road.
Precisely. Paul's conviction didn't come from memorizing a textbook. It came from an undeniable personal encounter that fundamentally changed who he was. That personal transformation is a foundational concrete that clever arguments simply cannot break.
But wait, even if you have that internal rebar, what happens when the physical vehicle for that experience starts giving out? We've talked about external suffering and intellectual debates, but what happens when the decay is happening inside your own biology?
Well, Pastor Nemoto shares a highly vulnerable reality check regarding this exact fear.
What do they say?
He mentions that someone recently paid him a compliment telling him, "Pastor, you don't look 65.
Always nice to hear.
Right, and he admits he was flattered, as most of us would be. But then he juxtaposes that compliment with the mundane reality of being 65, like officially in the senior citizen category.
Yeah, the day-to-day reality is a bit different.
He describes the simple chore of lifting the heavy water jug to put it on the office water dispenser.
And every time he lifts that heavy jug now, he feels the strain. And a thought creeps into his mind, right? Like, how much longer will I be able to do this?
Yeah. It is a profound realization of our own physical limits. And he connects this creeping realization directly back to Paul's brutal honesty.
What did Paul say about it?
Paul wrote, "Even though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day."
Our outer man is decaying. Man, that is a tough psychological pill to swallow. I mean, society spends billions of dollars trying to hide or delay that exact reality.
Oh, absolutely. But Paul does not say that faith stops the physical decline. He fully acknowledges the terrifying reality that every single human being faces. We age, our cells weaken, we decay.
So where's the hope in that?
The mechanism of hope here hinges on the phrase, even though the outer man decays, the focus of the individual's identity shifts entirely to the inner man, which is undergoing constant renewal.
And to illustrate the psychological necessity of that shift, the source brings in a really fascinating historical narrative about Pastor Nemoto's father. Let's delve into the psychology of this because it is so interesting.
Yeah, it's a really powerful story.
So the pastor's father spent his most sensitive, formative youth enduring the absolute misery and deprivation of World War II in Japan.
He suffered through years of extreme scarcity and just massive national trauma. And then the war ends, and he experiences a visceral culture shock.
Yeah.
He gets a taste of a Hershey's chocolate bar from the American soldiers, which is a sweetness he had literally never encountered.
Wow.
And then he hears the lively, complex sounds of American big band jazz for the first time.
The cognitive dissonance there must have been staggering. He looks at this abundance, this joy, and realizes that Japan's immense sacrifice was pitted against a culture overflowing with resources.
Yeah, he thinks no wonder Japan lost.
The despair of feeling like the painful years of his youth had been for absolutely nothing. I mean, that must have been crushing.
The psychological void created by that realization is profound. But the timeline of his life continues into a completely different era. Japan subsequently entered its post-war economic miracle, leading right into the massive, unprecedented wealth of the 1980s bubble economy.
So after losing his youth to war, he spends the next decades experiencing the exact opposite. He's accumulating wealth, comfort, and the visible rewards of a booming economy.
A total 180.
And people internalize that kind of rising prosperity as personal virtue, You start to build your entire identity around the tangible things you can see and measure.
And then the sermon points out the stark, inevitable truth of economic history, the bubble burst.
Yeah, it always does.
All of those visible, tangible rewards, the soaring property values, the status, the corporate security, they all just vanished.
And losing that wealth isn't just a financial hit. Psychologically, if your entire identity was built on those seen rewards to make up for miserable youth, and those rewards vanish overnight, you are left with nothing. The scaffolding completely collapses.
Which brings us to the mechanism of shifting to the eternal. Pastor Nemoto unpacks Paul's ultimate conclusion in this passage. Paul says, "We look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal."
The things seen are temporal, the things unseen are eternal. That's a heavy thought.
It is. And the pastor shares that his father eventually found faith later in life, a shift that was actually triggered by the death of his wife.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he realized that the temporary joys of the post-war era and the fleeting wealth of the Japanese economic bubble were just as subject to decay as the human body. He ultimately found what Paul calls an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison.
A foundation that outlasts both economic collapse and physical death.
Exactly. It is anchored in the unseen. It won't burst like an economic bubble, and it won't weaken like a 65-year-old's arms lifting a water jug.
That is such a profound way to look at it. Let's try to synthesize all of this for the listener, because we've covered a lot of ground today.
We really have.
So we started with the mundane cognitive machinery of stopping at a red light, how we constantly outsource our trust to invisible systems. And we explored how true faith utilizes that same trust, but tests it through the grueling daily grind of the crucible where you are afflicted but choose to keep believing.
Right, and then we differentiated between the fragile scaffolding of borrowed knowledge and the unshakable concrete of lived personal transformation, like that blind man who simply knows he can now see.
And finally, we looked at the psychological necessity of shifting our identity away from the decaying physical world and temporary empires, anchoring our hope in the unseen and eternal.
And you know, Pastor Nemoto concludes his sermon with a very pointed challenge. He gives this warning against the trap of religious routine.
Yeah, it's so easy to fall into that.
It is incredibly easy to substitute the comfortable habit of religion for the active, gritty fire of belief. The true test of this invisible architecture is being able to say, I believe this now. Not because it's a habit, not because a textbook told me to, but because I have lived it and experienced it myself in this present moment.
It's really about possessing your own undeniable reality. And that brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over today.
Yeah, think about this one.
Imagine if everything seen in your life right now was violently stripped away. Just imagine your wealth, your youth, your physical strength, your career status, all of it gone, disappearing overnight like a bursting economic bubble.
Just poof, gone.
If all the seen things vanished, what unseen personal experiences do you possess that absolutely no one could ever argue you out of? What is your unshakable concrete when the visible world fails?
That's a question that sticks with you.
It really does. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you accelerate through an intersection or check the weather, remember the invisible architecture of trust you're relying on, and keep seeking out the profound truths hidden in your everyday experiences. Until next time.